and drone and every particulate diving toward the dirt. The rampant heart its last kick and holler, the blood clot's last long swim to the lung, praise the lung, its last whistle, and the kidneys no more. Say this, say praise the machine hiss your father became and the quick way he gave it up. Say praise the liver's dread swell. Say it again. Say it with your heart and neck and lent throat gaped and flayed to the sky. Say it covering someone's hand with yours, straightening your tie. Say it to the earth's fat mouth. Say it the way you can turn on your heel to spark fire and make your limber hip twist like a lesser storm, or the way there is a storm between your two good hips, which are good music if you listen. Say it in your polished shoes. To the organist, say it too. Praise the heart, its rivers, and each rope twisted in the body. And every bird housed in the body, vulture, gull, raven, jackrabbit, cass, wick, and flame a bird too. Say praise to flame a bird too. Praise to the nerve endings in your teeth and to your tongue, like a blind man's hand reading her teeth, and the tongue inside the eyes, and the nose and the tongue, and the heart and the tongue. Say praise to salt, tears, stain, and skin ripped apart like a kite flipping in the wind. Praise the rip in the kite and the geese flying through it. Praise the wings you swore you had when you were 6 years old and the wings that remain today. Praise every flower you never smelled and every dog you never kissed. And the skinny farmer at the market with bad teeth who gave you his last cantaloupe and peppers and snap peas who you never kissed. Praise the handful of freckles dashed across your father's face that you never kissed until he would not wake again. Say it. Say it again. Say praise the sunlight trapped on your father's face and the body's slapdash racket slipping away if you want to or not. Clean the dirt from your teeth and the glass from your fists if you want to or not. Tie both your shoes and fix your suspenders and praise the heart inside the heart, cracking its shackles, its thunderclap shrug, its 2,000 dolphins waving goodbye. Praise every day the 2,000 dolphins waving goodbye, shaking off our hearts and waving goodbye. This is called the Janky. Janky is a word that I learned when I moved to Indiana, I think. I don't think I really heard it before that, but it's a damn good word. Yesterday, I was working in the yard, getting it into some kind. So this is I'm reading from the Book of Delights. This is a book of short essays that I wrote. I should just tell you, I wrote a book of short essays called the Book of Delights. And there was a prompt. I gave myself a kind of prompt. I didn't give myself the prompt. One day I was writing, I was walking up a hill in Umbria in Italy, a nice place to be. And I was walking up a hill and on one side was sunflowers and on the other side was like, something beautiful. And there was like fennel, wild fennel, and I don't know, like plum trees and everything. And honeybees and maybe linden trees. And it was just like the most, it was delightful. And I thought, oh, I should write a little essay about this experience of delight. And then something came through very quickly and was like, do it every day for a year. So I did. And that's this book, the Book of Delights. And I gave myself 3 constraints. The first was to do it every day, which I didn't quite do. And then the second was to write them by hand, which I did. And the third was to write them quickly. So I drafted all these things in 30 minutes. So it's just kind of an interesting, it was an interesting exercise. And it's an interesting exercise because I'm doing it again. I'm writing a second Book of Delights because it's been 5 years since I wrote that last one. Maybe I'll read one of those too. The Janky. Yesterday I was working in the yard, getting it into some kind of order. order of very loose usage in this case. And I noticed the gumi bush with its thousands of unripe speckled berries crowding the blueberry bush, shading it almost completely. I grabbed a rickety, one-armed magenta rocking chair I'd plucked from the street on trash day a couple years back, and I wedged it beneath the light-hogging gumi branches such that nothing needed to be cut. And the gumi branches became a kind of arbor over the rickety one-armed chair in case someone decided to sit in it, which I wouldn't recommend. As I stepped back to admire my work, I thought, rubbing my chin, now that's janky. Just like the pear tree whose limb I spread with my friend Brooke's old Adidas trail runner, with her permission, of course. And like the old window I propped on a stray log to make a little hot box for my squash, cucumber, and watermelon starts. So janky. One of the many delights of a garden, I'm finding, are the ways it encourages jankiness. Something about the delirium incited by lily blooms, where the pollinators swooning over the bush cherry interrupts one's relationship to commerce, perhaps. The garden makes you grab the nearest thing so you can keep crawling through it. It might be that the logics of delight interrupt the logics of capitalism. Aside, shouldn't we pause to admire the onomatopoeicness of the word janky? Because no word I know sounds more like my crooked shed door. Sounds more like duct tape being ripped from the roll. To be clear, my efforts at the janky are modest compared to my folks, from whom I learned it in part, probably to their upwardly mobile chagrin, which is a good place to say the plain, which is that janky is a class designation. It often implies a degree of judgment, often by people still haunted by and sprinting from the tendrils of poverty, about broke people things. I am no longer a broke person. And so you would be right to read my affinity for the jank complicatedly, with a nod to privilege and inheritance both. My folks were mostly broke people who had neither the time nor the resources to always fix things the boring way, which is called replacement. And so the hatchback cracked up by a trash truck, the insurance money from which they needed to pay some bills, got affixed with a bungee cord. Me and my brother's wristbands were made of the tops of striped tube socks. The hammer we kept under the seat to tap the stuck starter until it went completely kaput. A rectangle of sheet metal screwed into the rusted out floorboard of the Corolla, a sheet of plywood tossed over the dinner table for holiday dinners, taped glasses, shoe glue, duct tape car hood. Oh, I could go on. I think I'm advocating for a kind of innovation or an innovative spirit, which seems often to be occasioned by deprivation or being broke or broke ass, which condition I am adamantly not advocating. But I am advocating for the delight one feels making a fire pit with the inside of a dryer, or keeping the dryer door shut with an exercise band, which is probably caused by endorphins released from a bout of cognitive athleticism, which is also called figuring something out, which is something we all go to school, some of us for years and years, to forget how to do. Here's one. This is called bindweed ... delight. For those of you who don't know what bindweed is, if you're a gardener, you do know. Bindweed is a plant that's actually in the sweet potato family. And I actually have some sweet potato flips that I need to put in this weekend. And I'm going to show you something. This is what the leaf of a sweet potato looks like if you haven't grown them. And it's not unlike what bindweed looks like. They're in the same family. And morning glory and all that. Anyway, bindweed is a plant that it kind of climbs up and kind of is, it's a very good, it's a hardy plant, sturdy, quick growing, knows how to live. Put it like that. Bindweed ... delight. There are gardeners reading this who are likely thinking that if I try to turn bindweed, that most destructive, noxious, invasive, life-destroying plant, into a delight, they will bind me and pour glyphosate down my throat. That might be overstatement. All the same, it is a cloying glass half fullness to wrangle bindweed into a delight. Though I'm going for it, shortly after having spent 20 minutes pulling it from my newly planted mound of 5 sweetmeat squash. Yes, sweetmeat. Try to say that without smiling. Out near the woodpile. Already coming up in that mound is all the buckwheat and clover I planted, which, along with the hopefully soon to be thorough coverage of the sweetmeat foliage, might crowd out the bindweed. You are right to observe in me the desire not to live with bindweed, which does not in the least negate or supersede my desire to make living with bindweed, which I do, okay. I carefully pull the arrow-headed and somewhat reptilian plants from the soil, which, if left to grow, will quickly find something to ascend by wrapping or binding to it. There is a lovely feeling to gently pulling the sprouts so that the roots slide unbroken and blanched from the soil, putting them in my pockets. I always have bindweed in my pockets. Very careful not to drop any part, which, lore has it, will reroot and strangle your children as they sleep. I do this work often on my hands and knees, scanning the garden beds for bindweed, pulling the straw back over here, lifting the leaves of the collards over there. I notice the lettuces are untouched by critters, but the cabbages are getting nibbled. The parsley is starting to get thick. The potatoes need mounding, I notice, sliding a long strand of bindweed from the patch. The beans maybe got washed out from all the rain. And when I pull this sprout, breaking it at the stem, and dig some to get it all out, I notice the worms tunneling through the soil. And if I think I'm in a hurry or think I ought to be and quickly walk by to peek at the beds, the teeny bindweed sprouts will sing out to me. Stay in the garden, they say. And I often oblige, despite my obligations, getting back on my hands and knees, my thumb and forefinger caressing the emergent things free, all of us rooting around for the light. This one is called, let me do this one. This is not a garden essay at all. It's called Cup Licking. Today I found myself, I adore that construction for its Whitmanian assertion of multitudinousness, licking the little remnants, little stains from the coffee dribbling down the rim of the cup. More fastidious than lascivious, kind of cleaning the cup like a raccoon. The first time I noticed someone doing this, it was my friend, my professor, Susan Blake. I was back at Lafayette College on a teaching fellowship, and we were meeting over lunch to talk about me co-teaching the Invisible Man unit. She got a warm up on her coffee as we were eating dessert, pumpkin pie, I think. And I noticed her lick the cup, unself-consciously removing the dribble stains. I can't recall if she looked to see how thorough a job she did, though I usually do, and will touch up where I've missed. Nor do I recall if she licked the cup more than once, though I assume she did, since I do, and she was my teacher in licking the cup. I think I wondered when she licked the cup, dragging her broad tongue against the porcelain, if she was flirting, if cup licking was a way middle-aged people communicate desire. Being a middle-aged person now, it's no surprise that I worry that any odd gesture might smuggle with it the possibility for misperception as flirting with beginning-aged people, some of whom I teach. And that, friends, is a losing battle. By which I mean to say, I don't think she was flirting. And if I lick the cup while in the presence of students, I do it surreptitiously and never, God forbid, while making eye contact. When Professor Blake, which she forbade me from calling her and so made me a kind of adult, when Susan generously read the first 2 chapters of my dissertation, she asked me, without meaning to hurt my feelings, if I spent anywhere near as much time on my prose as I do my poems. When she handed the 60 or so pages back, all sliced up with red pen comments, she also handed me a handbook kind of book called Writing Prose, 9th edition. with the ugliest teal cover ever. How do we thank our dead teachers? I just had the very strong feeling that it would have been so nice if she could have read these essays. Like, you're getting better, kid. Let me read one of these poems from catalog. This is called The Fig Tree on 9th and Christian. Tumbling through, so let me just say, this is Philadelphia, 9th and Christian Street. It's actually, as people have told me who've gone to kind of find the fig tree, they've told me it's not exactly a 9th and Christian. It's between 9th and 10th and Christian, in the event that you go there. And yeah, one day I was just walking to this great diner called Sabrina's, and near the Italian Market in Philadelphia. And here was this scene going on, this fig tree that's probably 20 or 30 feet tall in Philadelphia, dropping, gads of fruit. To the fig tree on 9th and Christian. Tumbling through the city in my mind without once looking up, the racket in the lugwork, probably rehearsing some stupid thing I said or did, some crime or other. The city, they say, is a lonely place. Until, yes, the sound of sweeping. And a woman, yes, with a broom beneath which you are now too, the canopy of a fig, its arms pulling the September sun to it. And she has a hose too, and so works hard, rinsing and scrubbing the walk, lest some poor sod slip on the silk of a fig and break his hip and not probably reach over to gobble up the perpetrator. The light catches the veins in her hands when I ask about the tree. They flutter in the air, and she says, take as much as you can, please help me. So I load my pockets and mouth, and she points to the stepladder against the wall to me, take more. But I was without a sack, so my meager plunder would have to suffice. And an old woman whom gravity was pulling into the earth loosed one from a low-slung branch, and its eye wept like hers, which she dabbed with a kerchief as she cleaved the fig with what remained of her teeth. And soon there were 8 or 9 people gathered beneath the tree, looking into it like a constellation, pointing, do you see it? And I am tall, and so good for these things. And a bald man even told me so when I grabbed 3 or 4 for him, reaching into the giddy throngs of yellow jackets, sugar-stoned, which he only pointed to, smiling and rubbing his stomach. I mean, he was really rubbing his stomach, like there was a baby in there. It was hot. His head shone while he offered recipes to the group using words which I couldn't understand. And besides, I was a little tipsy on the dance of the velvety heart rolling in my mouth, pulling me down and down into the oldest countries of my body, where I ate my first fig from the hand of a man who escaped his country by swimming through the night, and maybe never said more than 5 words to me at once, but he gave me figs. And a man on his way to work hops twice to reach at last his fig, which he smiles at and calls baby. Come here, baby, he says, and blows a kiss to the tree, which everyone knows cannot grow this far north, being Mediterranean and favoring the rocky, sun-baked soils of Jordan and Sicily. But no one told the fig tree or the immigrants. There's a way the fig tree grows in groves. It wants, it seems, to hold us. Yes, I am anthropomorphizing. God damn it. I have twice in the last 30 seconds rubbed my sweaty forearm into someone else's sweaty shoulder, gleeful, eating out of each other's hands on Christian Street in Philadelphia, a city like most, which has murdered its own people. This is true. We are feeding each other from a tree at the corner of Christian and 9th. Strangers, maybe never again. I want to read this this little poem. This is called Ode to Drinking Water from My Hands, which today in the garden, I'd forgotten I'd known, and more forgotten I'd learned, and was taught this by my grandfather, who, in the midst of arranging and watering the small bouquets on mostly the freshest graves, saw my thirst and cranked the rusty red pump, bringing forth from what sounded like the gravelly throat of an animal a frigid torrent. And with his hands, he made a lagoon from which he drank, and then I drank, before he cranked again, making of my hands now a fountain in which I can see the silty bottom drifting while I drink, and my grandfather waters the flowers on the graves, among which are his and his wife's, unfinished and patient, glistening after he rinses the bird shit from his wife's, and the pump exhales, and I drink to the bottom of my fountain and join him in his work. This one's called Ending the Estrangement. You know, I feel like part of my whole life is figuring out how to sort of be with sorrow, actually. I feel like that's, and maybe that's a common sort of human experience, figuring out how to be with sorrow. You know, I have this book coming out in October called Inciting Joy. And I feel like one of the main sort of questions is how being present with our sorrow, in fact, enables joy, our capacity for joy, you know, it deepens our capacity for joy. Anyway, this is called Ending the Estrangement. And that's the first line as well. Ending the estrangement from my mother's sadness, which was to me unbearable, until it felt to me not like what I thought it felt like to her, and so felt inside myself like death, like dying, which I would almost have rather done, though adding to her sadness would rather die than do. But by sitting still, like what in fact it was, a form of gratitude, which when last it came, drifted like a meadow lit by torches of cardinal flower, one of whose crimson blooms, when a hummingbird hovered nearby, I slipped into my mouth, thereby coaxing the bird to scrawl on my tongue its heart's frenzy, its fleet, nectar-questing song, with you, dear mother, I now sing along. And I think I'll read, we're at 40, I think I'll read two more of these, and then we can have a little Q&A. This is called Tomato on Board. Tomato on board. What you don't know until you carry a tomato seedling through the airport and onto a plane is that carrying a tomato seedling through the airport and onto a plane will make people smile at you almost like you're carrying a baby, a quiet baby. I did not know this until today, carrying my little tomato, about 3 or 4 inches high in its 4-inch plastic starter pot, which my friend Michael gave to me, smirking about how I was going to get it home. Something about this at first felt naughty, not comparing a tomato to a baby, but carrying the tomato onto the plane. And so I slid the thing into my bag while going through security, which made them pull the bag for inspection. When the security guy saw it was a tomato, he smiled and said, I don't know how to check that. Have a good day. But I quickly realized that one of its stems, which I almost wrote as arms, was broken from the jostling. And it only had 4 of them. So I decided I better just carry it out in the open. And the shower of love began. It was a shower of love I also felt while carrying a bouquet of lilies through the streets of Rome last summer. People, maybe women especially, maybe women my age-ish and older especially, smiling with approval. A woman in a house dress beating out a rug on a balcony shouted, "Bravo!" An older couple holding hands both smiled at me and pulled into each other, knitting their fingers together. My showerers might have been disappointed to know I was not giving the lilies to a sweetheart, but to my friends Damiano and Moira, who had translated a few of my poems into Italian and were so kind as to let me stay at their place a couple nights while I was passing through. On the way to the vegetarian restaurant Damiano's ex-wife owns with her partner, we walked by what I'm pretty sure Damiano said was the biggest redbud tree in the world. It stretched for yards, lounging periodically onto the mossy earth. Its beautiful black bark glistened by the streetlights. Though translation is an act of love, so my showerers needn't be disappointed at all. Before boarding the final leg of my flight, one of the workers said, "Nice tomato," which I don't think was a come on. And the flight attendant asked about the tomato at least 5 times, non-exaggeration, every time calling it my tomato. "Where's my tomato? How's my tomato? You didn't lose my tomato, did you?" She even directed me to an open seat in the exit row. "Why don't you guys go sit over there and stretch out?" I gathered my things and set the little guy in the window seat so she could look out. When I got my water, I poured some into the little guy's soil. When we got bumpy, I put my hand on the little guy's container, careful not to snap another arm off. And when we landed and the pilot put the brakes on hard, my arm reflexively went across the seat, holding the little guy in place, the way my dad's arm would when we had to brake hard in that car without seatbelts to speak of, in one of my very favorite gestures in the Encyclopedia of Human Gestures. And let me do one more. This last one is called Pulling Carrots. Today we pulled the carrots from the garden that Stephanie sowed back in March. She planted 2 kinds, a red kind shaped like a standard kind, and a squat orange kind with a French name, a kind I recall the packet calling a market variety, probably because, like the red kind, it's an eye catcher, and sweet, which I learned nibbling a couple of both kinds, like Bugs Bunny, as I pulled them. The word kind, meaning type or variety, which you have noticed I used with some flourish back there, is among the delights, for it puts the kindness of carrots front and center in this discussion. Good for your eyes, yummy, etc. In addition to reminding us that kindness and kin have the same mother, maybe making those to whom we are kind our kin, to whom even those we might be. And that circle is big. These are kinds, I'm thinking, as I snip the feathery green tops, making my way through the pile, holding the root in one hand, feeling the knobs and grains, the divots where they've grown against a rock or some critter nibbled, or the 4 or 5 of the red kind that have almost become 2 carrots, carrot legs in need of some petite pantaloons. The utterly forgettable magic of the carrot, which applies as well to the turnip and radish and potato and garlic and onion and ginger and turmeric and yam and sunchoke and shallot and salsify and maca and sweet potato, is that because much of the food resides under the ground, it probably had to be uncovered. And after the discovering and the uncovering, choosing which ones to replant and replant and replant and replant and replant and replant and replant until there was the long red kind I'm brushing the soil from, until the squat kind piling up at the bottom of the basket. It was kindness. They are our family. Thank you very much.
So much, Ross. We got a couple minutes for questions. If anybody has any. Bring up the lights a little bit. Still see the light.
I have a question.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. That was beautiful. Thanks for reading. We were talking this morning in our workshop about how to get out of the cerebral place into a more poetic place,
Mm.
which I struggle with all the time. And I'm just wondering what helps you?
How do you mean? What do you mean by the cerebral place? What is the cerebral place?
Like the really thinky
Yeah,
ego place
yeah, yeah,
versus the more like sensory.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a good question. And because I like both. Like I like to think hard. Like, actually this kid I was I've been writing stuff with, um, he's a younger writer and he's kind of a storyteller. And we were sort of talking and I was like, um, you don't need you don't need to do philosophy like I do, because one part of the thing that I like to do is like, I actually really like to think hard. But I think, so one of the things I want to say is that I love probably what you're doing. The other thing though, is that if there is an ability, I wonder, this is a question, if there's an ability to be like really precise in describing the physical world in the midst of that, so that the thought does not supplant the actual materiality of our lives, So you can think with a tomato plant, or you can think with the texture of your cat's tail, or you could think with, the pot on the stove bubbling over, and the way that it looks, and the smell that reminds you of your uncle or whatever. So that's one way I'd sort of wonder about that with you. I feel like I feel less and less convinced of almost anything I say about writing, in terms of like advice. But the one thing I feel really convinced about still, we'll see about this like in 2 weeks, is that precision, like precision is the truth. Precision is a thing. And that's a kind of a broad enough aspiration, but often when I think of precision, I'm thinking of like, how do you describe with the most beautiful precision the thing that made you have the thought, so that it's not just the thought in, kind of just not just the thought absent the thing. Because the fact of the matter is that we have thoughts occasioned by the smell, which is actually generated by the pear blossom on the tree that will turn into a pear, if it's pollinated by a bee, which has a texture, and all of those things. So does that offer you anything?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Is there anybody in the house that has a question? Friends, neighbors? Some folks online got questions?
Liz wants to know if you've ever been invited to be poet laureate.
No, thank you though. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah. Yeah, those microbes. It's the truth. It's the truth. Yeah.
Farah is wondering, is this?
Yeah, I'll read that. I'm wondering what you might be discovering in the Second Delights project that has surprised you and or has taken you different places from your first time around. It's a great question. And partly, one of the things that there's several things, because I'll be done August 1st. So I'm pretty much, I'm getting toward the end, 6 weeks out, 5 weeks out. And one of the things that I realized that I'm having conversations with interpretations or other people's relationships with the delights. So the first book. So there are essays where I'm sort of contending in a very real way. I don't even know if it's like helping readers to understand that like delight absent sorrow is it's like for kids, And I understand maybe a particularly, I say this, kind of ignorantly, but like as a particular kind of American relationship to like happiness, which suggests that you could just be happy, that, like you can just be happy, which isn't my experience. And it's actually not the experience that I want. I want the experience of like, being very present with, my beloved's dying and change, which is not only happy, even if it's not devastating. It's not only happy, confusion and terror and, befuddlement. They're all part of the experience. So partly I feel like one of the things that it's very interesting to me actually as I read them is that I'm arguing, I'm sort of thinking, with readers, and I'm trying, I think, to probably maybe deepen a kind of definition of delight. That's another thing that I'm doing. I'm sort of like always reluctantly doing definitions, because I am also sort of cerebral in a certain kind of way, and I'll kind of tease myself about it sometimes that I'll be trying to like taxonomize and stuff, and I'm always like, don't do too much taxonomy, Ross, but yeah.
Shishwan, I'll repeat your question if you can say it now.
I'm just wondering if you're interested in writing
Are you interested in writing a gardening book?
Oh yeah, I totally am.
And with what?
love that.
Okay, I think I'm probably gonna do it. In this next book, I have a couple essays. The book is called Inciting Joy, and I kind of meditate on these different, things that I've been a part of, I guess, practices, I would say. And I kind of wonder, like, these practices that to me incite joy. And then the second question is, so the question is, what incites joy? And the second question is, what does joy incite? And one of the essays is on gardening, and the other essay is on orcharding. Two that are sort of, but my garden sort of features throughout the thing because the garden is sort of a central part of my life. But I have been thinking about a book, simple book called Why I Garden. Which could actually allow me again to come back to that first question. It can allow me to just think, that's sort of what writing is to me. It's just like an opportunity to think. It's how I do some of my best thinking, I think. Like having conversations with your most sort of exciting interlocutors, writing is that for me.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've been looking through your books, which I fortunately was able to read in some of my MFA classes recently. But what you just said earlier about your whole life maybe being an attempt to try to live with sorrow, and yet so many of the words joy and delight and gratitude, I normally didn't associate with sorrow. Yeah. But I have followed this train of thought to date that you kept going with just now, because we have a dogwood tree that is the most beautiful, has the most beautiful pink blooming tree, and all the neighbors that walk by or look at it, and they look at it. I've not looked at it and oh, what a beautiful tree, I'm so lucky it's tree, but it's dying.
Yes.
And its branches are, I'm so sad about it, but it's curling its leaves up, but I love it even more.
Totally. Yeah.
I guess I'm just feeling in sync with you.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And I guess one of my questions too is like, what happens when we know that every dogwood tree is dying, or that all of us are dying? How do we sort of walk the earth with that understanding? It's kind of like, it's a great teacher, I think. But I think it's probably like you know, it's a certain kind of labor. It feels like a useful and beautiful kind of labor to be, you know, really cognizant that even in the midst of like what doesn't feel like, you know, pleasant people who you can kind of automatically be like, oh my God, I hope you don't die. But when you're with people who maybe, you know, you're not like pals with, or you don't love, and or you're in, you know, difficult stuff with, and you're like me, you are dying. You know, I don't know. I feel like that's a practice that I'm sort of interested in. I love pink dogwoods. My God, there's one of the delights in this new book is about pink dogwoods, because I love dogwoods and I love redbuds, but pink dogwoods, they blow my fucking mind. I just love them so much. Oh my God.
Maybe we got time for one quick question. Anybody else got one?
Here's a good one. Yeah, it says, Barb says, I heard you on a podcast with Krista Tippett say that delight means of light. Oh, I think I said it means of or from light and without light. Delight means of light and without light, the absence of light. And that's actually, this is such a great point or question, because that's actually from one of the longer essays in the book, probably the longest essay in the book, called Joy is Such Human Madness, which is a riff on Zadie Smith's essay Joy. And she says joy is such human madness. And then that's actually that essay is kind of the beginning of this book, Inciting Joy, actually. But that's not the actual etymology. I love doing fake etymologies. Like, you know, this is like one of my favorite things to do, like pretend etymologizing. And but I think I think the actual etymology is from like delicious and delectable and stuff. I'm pretty sure. And I don't even know that it has anything to do with light. But you know, weird thing is that I wrote the whole book and I wrote it again, and I have not yet looked up the whole. People just told me. But I do feel in some sort of way that like that joy in particular is like this idea of being emanating from the light, and also a kind of emanating from the light that understands the absence of light. You know, it's also how I think of gratitude, actually. You know, like gratitude. It just pops in my head to say the name Robin Wall Kimmerer too, by the way, if you haven't read Braiding Sweetgrass. I feel like she's among the best, you know, thinkers about gratitude that I know of. But part of gratitude is understanding that, you know, the dogwood tree is here and it is incomprehensibly beautiful. And part of it's being incomprehensibly beautiful is that we know that the dogwood tree will not be here, you know. When we have a good season growing, you know, sweet potatoes, partly it's so wonderful because we don't always, you know, and all of those things, you know, when we turn the water on in the tap, it's like, because it's not guaranteed. And in fact, it's often otherwise. So there's a kind of emanating from the light, and there's a kind of understanding of you know, withoutness.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful place to leave it. Thank you so much, Ross.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. We'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you all for being so much.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
I'm the host. Wait.